Okay, to start out, um, this more so is about how, besides focusing on the Lower East Side, is how I got started in getting this done. And my parents are West Indian, and I was taught that every hour of the day you should be occupied. So in the late 90s, I had too much free time. So I took a course called Women in Photography. And one of the ideas was to photograph women. Let me just get my in here. And what I did, being a little shy, I felt very awkward walking up to women asking for their photograph. So what I did is I photographed women on buildings, all from New York. I didn't need a release. I knew where they were. They sometimes, like Viola, she would give me a little smile every now and then, but most of them were right there and they never complained as I took their photograph. After that, I decided to start photographing men on buildings. And I found there's a variety, not as many as women, but there were quite a number throughout the city. Most of the details on buildings range roughly from 1870 to about 1930, because after the Depression, things had stopped. After getting men, then I decided, why not do animals? And I found many animals around New York City. And this one right here is the only building in New York in the Bronx that I found pigeons, which is a little unusual. And then I started traveling to different cities, Philadelphia, Chicago, Columbus, Ohio, and I did flowers. This one over here, which I don't know what it says, that's in Chicago that I found, and in Philadelphia. And then I proceeded, sorry, the writing on the bottom. And then I started to Seattle, Washington, Philadelphia, different cities, and every city in Washington, D.C., and every city I found, there were some wonderful details. I've actually got every borough in New York City. Staten Island was the most challenging because there's not as many old buildings there. And one of the things, like down on Wall Street, many building details indicated what went on in the building. And this building was down on Wall Street. Obviously, they were in the shipping industry. This is right across from St. Patrick's Cathedral on Rockefeller Center on the 5th floor. And people are amazed that Rockefeller Center had these type of buildings on there. In the Bronx on Webster Avenue and East Tremont, the building is in terrible condition, fearing it may be cut down, but these details I found exquisite. Also, I found that in the West, when they do Asians, their eyes are partially closed. And this happens also, I found the same situation when I was in Denmark. And this I'm building on 42nd Street. Usually I give this to people on their birthday, the month of their birthday. And these are my Valentine's Day presents that I give out. I have all my stuff on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. This, obviously, Mother's Day and Father's Day. This is one that I give some of my old friends just to have a little fun. And this I give to my architect friends on their birthday, or just to say my way of saying hello. In 1970, I met this woman and her husband, and then I lost touch with them. And then back in about 2014, I got in touch with them on Facebook, and I decided, why don't I travel to Europe? And I'd pay them, and they would make all the arrangements with me, for me, I should say. And we have Madrid, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and I found out that many of the Africans, that's from Amsterdam, they imported Africans to do work on some of the buildings, some of the labor. And this one was very difficult to find. I'll go into detail later. This is in Copenhagen. Now, mind you, this detail you think would be an elaborate building, it was a very simple 4-story building, nothing fancy. And this one with a man wearing a lion's mask. You'll see some of these later on. And this is Lisbon, Warsaw, Berlin, Stockholm. In Amsterdam, a four-story building. These details are exquisite. Again, this building's roughly about 1890. What I would do when I travel in Europe, I'd find out where the train station is, and that's the oldest part of town, and I would just circle. Because again, the details, I said, after 1930, you'll find very few details on buildings. And in Amsterdam, this was a simple office building. And I almost think it was kind of religious, but it's a simple office building. Both details were on the building. And in Berlin, this is a school building on the 7th floor. I have two lenses when I travel, one to take the building and a zoom lens, a 700 zoom lens to get the detail. And I'd sometimes have to go back almost a block away to get the photograph. I thought this with the children was exquisite. Same building. And this is a school building in Copenhagen, and naturally the symbol of being wise. And this was an office building in Helsinki. I could not figure out what they did. And there's another university in Helsinki. This was difficult to take because it was on a hill, and I had to go very far back to get it, at least to make it look level. And in Lisbon, this was a theater, now a department store. And they had maybe a dozen of these details on the building. Also in the same neighborhood, this was also a theater. Now it's a Hard Rock Cafe. And this, when I was in Madrid, the sun hit these faces just right. And across the street from it, there were construction workers. So I tried to ask them to please stop work so I could take my picture. Well, I don't speak Spanish and they didn't speak English. And after a while they started laughing and they actually stopped work for me to let me take this picture, which I thought was like superb. One of the things I found is the eyes on the details change. And I believe, and a lot of this is just my feeling, it depends on the school that they went to of how they did the eyes. Because many of the details, that's the biggest difference I find when I'm traveling. This is on the City Hall in Oslo. And this photograph right here is a pimp, the prostitute, and a John. And it was written in a book by Kristen Kjog, which I thought was rather fascinating, being on City Hall. And this is right near the Eiffel's Tower on a museum. And this in Stockholm, this is a bank built in 1906. And the interesting thing is they're talking about airmail. So they were quite visionary to some degree in their thinking, but I thought this was exquisite as a detail. And in Warsaw, this is a 3-story building with commercial on the ground floor, and it has these details which are still intact. So I understand many of the finer details in Warsaw were destroyed. And in London, this, I believe, was a home for women. Now it's a bed and breakfast. And when I was in London, we were walking from the train station to the hotel. I saw this detail and I had to unload my luggage in the street because I thought I might forget it. And obviously, I think there was a Subway shop below it, but obviously the building obviously were with merchants. The Lower East Side. In New York City, the best variety of details I found was on the Lower East Side. The West Side of Manhattan has some really wonderful details, but the variety I found on the Lower East Side the most interesting. I've made about, I guess, 10 trips there, and each time I take about 500 photographs of different buildings. And I found it to be a joy. One of the interesting things about the Lower East Side, the word tenement house was not a negative term initially. It just meant a house owned by someone and renting out rooms to different people. But many of the developers, when the immigrants, the big immigration started about 1843 with the Irish immigrants. And so the developers were just throwing up buildings. So in turn, in 1879, what they call the old tenement house law changed for light and air. For example, every room had to have a window. So the window didn't go onto the street, the window was onto another room. So the laws had to change. And Jacob Riis, there was an exhibition in 1899 on tenement houses, and his book, How the Other Half Lives, really did a lot to change. And then the new law tenement came out in 1901, being the air shaft had to be larger, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the details on the facade actually were for the people on the other side of the street, especially those on the upper floors. And the interesting fact I found out that around 1900, 10% of the Jews in the world lived on the Lower East Side. And so why I think the Lower East Side for many Jews is a very important area as far as being in the United States. And the ornamentation on the buildings usually was about 3% of the construction cost, but also it represented certain pride in the building is why it was done. There are many Jewish architects. My specialty is the 1800s. And for example, Leopold Eldridge, I believe is to pronounce his name. One of his projects was the state capitol. He did the Brooklyn Academy of Music and St. George Episcopal Church in 1899. He was born in Prague and came to the United States in 1843 and was also one of the founding members of the American Institute of Architects. By the way, FAIA, the AIA stands for American Institute of Architects, and the F means I'm a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. That supposedly means I have a little more juice than some of the others. Arnold William Brunner, he did one building on, I think, Christie Street, but he's more famous for doing Lewiston Stadium in 1950, which is right by City College. Unfortunately, it's been torn down. And several other buildings, also as a member of the American Institute of Architects. But there are two other Jewish architects I want to mention. One is Dankmar Adler. He was a partner of Louis Sullivan, and he was an acoustical engineer. And he was also a consultant on doing Carnegie Hall. His formulas on acoustics are still used today. And Albert Kahn, he was an architect who worked in Detroit and did many of the major buildings in Detroit. Getting down to the buildings, these buildings are organized by the building number. And this building, these details are on the upper floors up here. And again, from the street, it's hard to see, but buildings across the street could appreciate them. Why these cherubs? It's still a mystery. And this building on Elizabeth Street has slightly Asian features. One of the interesting things, a fellow whose father worked on the Vanderbilt homes, and it was the foreman, the construction foreman, he sent me all the information on the construction workers. By the way, most of them were not Italian, which that's a rumor usually, but there were a very diverse group of people, and most of the factories were in Red Hook, Brooklyn. This building, I think, had something to do, an organization for the community members who lived during that period of time. And this cut off. Again, slight Asian features. So I believe some of the workers may have been Asian. And who this person is, sometimes it was the owner, sometimes the builder, their friends, lovers. And notice like the eyes on this person. I think could be a replica of a person, but I doubt that, but one can't tell. Usually I have to go very far back to make it look like I'm straight on it, but you can see there's a slight angle to this. And again, these eyes are blank. Another one with blank eyes. Some of my information got cut off, by the way, that I'm supposed to say. I mentioned about Red Hook, a rather exaggerated face. And this has slightly Native American features. And this one, now some of these details were unique and some were stock, I guess, out of a catalog. And this one, I think I found 3 of these faces all on the Lower East Side. And then with the large ears on this face here. And this detail is in the corner right over here. And here's that feature once again showing up on Eldridge Street. And sometimes the details are painted over. What they're trying to say in this one is a mystery to everyone. The same building. These are on the first floor, I guess, to frighten people who are not welcome. And this is on Monroe Street, and this detail is on this side, and I think I have the other one on the other side. This building detail, I think, were put on where fire escapes were added later, and fire escape became popular right after, more prominent after the Chicago fire, and so this may have been done prior to 1870, because of this, they usually would not chop up a detail like that. One of the dangers of many details are birds, and you can see how the acid has eaten away on the cornice and damaged the detail. And I'll get to my feelings to some of this later. There's another building on Henry Street. Yeah, and I sometimes why some of the features have horns and some do not, whether it's a negative or a thing someone's trying to say. And this is, I think, paying homage or respect to someone. And here's another one on Rutgers Street, very Asian features. And this was done in brownstone. Brownstone usually has to be cut a certain way so that the water will penetrate it and won't deteriorate as fast. And this obviously was done, poorly done. A child of the owner, the developer. I found along Prospect Park West, you'll find some of the buildings have children on them. One building has a wife and several of the children, probably of the owner. Another, this one has recessed eyes. Now this woman shows up a lot, and I'm not sure whether this woman, and there's a man also who shows up, whether it's her and her husband, they were developers, they were some religious features of people, but they show up so much. And because I don't speak Yiddish, and I'll read it, it's very difficult, but this is one of the mysteries to me about the Lower East Side, is this woman. And this man with the beard. They say somebody tried to paint over it, as you can see, poorly done. And wife of the owner, wife of the developer. The other wife of the owner or the developer. In Jacob Riis's book, How the Other Half Lives, How the Other Half Lives, he talks in 5 points. In the different points, each point had a different ethnic group. And I believe this was a group of the Africans, but then she has horns. Now this detail also, there's 3 buildings on the Lower East Side that have this, this woman. Pretty face, but who is it? A child. You see wires run everywhere. It's just the nature of modern technology. Now this building on Eldridge, this I believe was part of the garment district. As you can see the scissors right there. In the garment district around 38th Street and 7th Avenue, you'll find many details similar to this one. But the details on this building are unique. They're one of a kind. Maybe holding fabric, I'm not sure. But it's, well, the maintenance on some of these is appalling. A very exaggerated face with recessed eyes and the tongue sticking out. Again, this is a unique detail. There's no other, I never found another one like this. I've covering the Lower East Side and also Williamsburg. These details on here are not in Williamsburg. They're only in this community. Another reason why they must be saved. And the nose is broken. St. John's the Divine had a school teaching students how to do sculpture work and restore these details. Nose broken, but tongue is sticking out. This building has about 7 details, all different faces, and I believe it was the family of the developer or the owner, because all the details, the eyes are almost all the same. And again, on this building, these details are unique. They're not repeated anywhere. I have a total of about 19,000 faces, or details, I should say, in my library or in my computer. And there she is again. And a few of them are slightly different, but basically the same features. Again, detail. An animal with horns. Looks like an angry animal, actually. And this is on a narrow street. You can see by the angle that I photograph it. And the large mouth and tongue, exaggerated mouth, I say, and tongue. And this, most of the time I photograph in the winter. And the reason is the sun is actually closer to the earth in the winter. And also there are no trees. And this one, the tree, I couldn't, there was no way I could get it straight on. And the other one. Some of them are a bit amusing. And there she is again on Henry Street. Usually, sometimes her hat changes, but her nose and eyes and cheekbones are very similar on many times. And just more like a fun face. And the man with the beard again, this time his mouth is closed, but notice the eyes on the pupils. Again, the recessed eyes. In the same building, the horns. These are on the first floor, one floor up, I should say, second floor. And the horns. And on Delancey, this is on the Tenement House Museum. This is, again, Asian features. And this building on the lower floor. And this is the man that comes up often on the Lower East Side. Again, only on the Lower East Side, nowhere else in New York. I think it's a religious feature because of the hat, but I could be wrong. But we're talking about the people I've spoken to, 1890, many people don't know what hat was worn by some of the religious people. And there she is again. A lion with a ring in its mouth. Again, this is on the lower floor. It's on the bottom down here. with the wings. And this building on Madison Street, I think this is a nurse. Again, I'm projecting. My mother was a nurse and had to wear a hat, but I think it is, and the birds and some of the floral on the top. This is on brownstone, is why it's decaying. You can see the building has shifted some. On the same building, more it's decayed beyond repair, but the eyes are recessed. And on the same building, the man, which looks like more like a Viking. And this face, I'm not sure whether this was painted over, but it's so radically different. But again, this detail is in excellent condition. And you can make out what you want for this one. I'm not sure. I think no, okay. And the sleeping man with a beard. And some of them on the green man on some of the houses I found on the Upper West Side. And the wings. And lion, similar to the one before, earlier. And here he is again with the hat. And it's, I think it's a religious figure. I can't say for sure, and I think the woman may be his wife. But there's no telling, but she shows up so much, there must be some reason that the developers were paying respect to the two of them. And here he is again on Ludlow. And I believe there's his wife. Here is again, slightly different, but the same hat. Oops. And this is on the lower floor, looking at people entering the building. This is on the first floor, right down here. I have two of them. And with those eyes, which I find to be a real mystery. This is on one of the upper floors. Another one. And this is on the lower portion of the building. No, this is up on top, up around here. Yeah. This is the first one I took, the first woman I took when I was in my class. As I mentioned, I did get an A for most of, I think, for being creative. And here she is, pretty much the same, but certain features are similar to the one that comes up so often. And again, I think another religious figure, again, in the community because of the face. The eyes are really interesting. And there she is again. By the way, I have many more photographs of her and the gentleman. And that Native American I was telling you about that you saw earlier, again. And this is up at the top here. That gentleman with the beard again, with the eyes. And there she is again. So I do believe she and the man had something to do in the community. I used to walk around on Madison Street. I would usually walk on the west side. So one day I walked on the east side and I discovered these up here, which I thought were absolutely exquisite. And the architect, frankly, he did several buildings on the Lower East Side. But what I found interesting on this, which is rare, the Boston Terracotta Company, RP. In 1901, an initials RP, that was a sculptor. You find this more so in Europe. You'll find the detail of the initials of the sculpture. And then on Ludlow Street. And there he is again. And because the buildings were done by different architects, I'm not sure whether they got a sale on details from the stone cutters. I'm not sure. There she is again. And there's that other gentleman with the beard, once again, with the eyes. And if you stare at the eyes, I almost feel that they're looking at you. And this is the post office built in the 1980s, 70s, 80s, with Mercury, the messenger. And again, that detail, which comes up often enough. And once again, with the just knowing the eyes and how it blends in with the detail. There is another one with the hat. And there she is. And this detail comes up very often. Again, I believe a stock item that was used on the buildings. Exaggerated tongue. The Hearst brothers, they also did a number of buildings on the Lower East Side. And the gentleman with the hat. The woman, once again. And this another pretty face with recessed eyes. And unfortunately, during some kind of maintenance, the nose was broken and no one fixed it. The exaggerated mouth on the building on Orchard Street. This is Adam and Eve on Henry Street, but also the same details on Lafayette Street and also in a building right near a Gracie Mansion. With the hat. And the woman again. And then I think maybe a nurse, not sure. 211 Madison Street. And this is Viola, who when I'm out down on the Lower East Side, I always stop by and say hello to her. And she gives me a very small smile, but she won't do it for anyone else. So if you're in the neighborhood, just say hello to Viola if you're in there. Man with the beard, once again, and the woman. Because they repeat themselves so often, I really believe it's someone important during that time. And so far, I've not been able to find who it was. I think another nurse, I believe, judging from the hat, the man with the beard, and the woman. Little different, but the features are very similar. The bearded man. This is a unique one. This is not typical of all of them. And there she is again. But it happens so often, and this is the only neighborhood I have found that. Even in the other cities that I visited that have tenement houses, not like this. They'll have details, but not repeat details. Is why I feel these people were extremely important. And here's that detail that was on Hester Street, repeated again. Another building by the Herter brothers, sorry. A detail, which is up high. And from the street, it's very difficult to see, but the building across the street will be able to appreciate it. Another similar detail, which you've seen before. I believe a nurse on Broome Street. With the virus, I'm held hostage I live on City Island, so I'm held hostage on City Island. So what I've been doing with my wife is taking pictures of the sun and the moon. What else? And this is one of my favorite shots of the sun. And what's interesting, I know they talk about the man in the moon. I think, just my thought, it's a woman in the sun, because I don't think a man could coordinate that many planets all at once and circle them. But it's just a theory. This building, I visited in 2008 on York Avenue, and the detail up here and several details of all our explorers, I thought was fascinating. And I took the picture of the explorer at the top. And then 2010 walk, because I try to do the same neighborhood again and again because I sometimes miss things. I went back to the building and it was gone. And my first reaction was to dial 911 to report an art. There's a Visual Arts Right Act of 1990 that you cannot take away public art without the author's permission. It's a crime and somebody has to be compensated. I'm trying, by the way, with landmarks to declare certain details on buildings landmarks so they cannot be destroyed. If the building is torn down, the detail is either put on the new building, which it won't be, or donated to a museum, because this art doesn't exist as it did once before. And to destroy it, it's senseless. It's not, I get upset. Norton Publishers, they published these 3 books. My first one was Faces in Stone, and then Animals in Stone, and they combined the 2 books in Figures in Stone, which one can get on Amazon or some local bookstores. And my expression to everyone, keep looking up. And somebody said they're going to put that on my tombstone, but for now, I suggest everybody, whatever city you go to, the artwork is there. Keep looking up. Thank you.